may recognize these artists. Why would any of them ever be on a scout patch? Well, let's see. Originally, Tipisa did not have as often as a patch a year, much less a patch for all its activities. The way it worked is we didn't have an activity patch unless it occurred to the people planning the activity to plan to have a patch. Well, who plans most of the lodge activities? The lodge chief. So in Tipisa, it worked out that any patch we had was selected by the chief. No LEC discussion or vote or anything. I had a lodge chief named Jeff Jonathan. You might recognize his name from the OA committee. That bothered him. He decided I wasn't very egalitarian. I said, look, I went and visited a neighboring lodge and I watched them spend 20 minutes of their LEC discussing the shape of a puzzle patch for next year, and they didn't even know what was going to be on the patch. He said, well, I don't know. So we went and visited another neighboring lodge, Alpata, and they were hosting an upcoming section event. And we sat there and watched, Jeff and I sat and watched them discuss their host items for half an hour, and then it passed unanimously. And as we were walking away, I said to Jeff, do you really want to spend 30 minutes of your LEC with people discussing things they already agree on anyway? And Jeff said, no. So we got that settled. Right about that time, a neighboring lodge came out with an annual set that looks very handsome. This is the feathers on the bottom show scenes from the Seminole War. So we decided to give it a try. And our first set was the 3-part. Now we had 3 items on the council calendar, 3 lodge events, spring conclave, service weekend, and fall fellowship, which fortuitously, the letters and spaces all take the same number of spaces. So the next year we decided to branch out. You may not think Central Florida is very urbanized, but we have an awful lot of medium and small sized communities. There is not enough work and tools at camp for 200 or 300 candidates at a time. So we have our deals by chapter. And the next year we did a set, we did a generic patch featuring all the chapter ordeals. This set is endangered species in Florida. The center patch, we wanted a jacket patch to go with the set, picked a wave out of a surfing magazine. Patch company couldn't handle that at all. Next year was 76, so of course, a puzzle patch for the bicentennial with a historical map of Florida. Now here we got a hold of our very first thread color chart. Boy, did it have a lot of colors on it we'd never used before. For example, that orange in the lower right is burnt orange. The blue in the upper left is something called Air Force blue. Next, we did, like many people, did Indians. Patch company said they couldn't possibly do the big jacket patch like we wanted because they had too much detail. We said, okay, just put the background figures in the silhouette. It's all right, we can do it. But now we can't put the individual figures on patches because they're too small. I said, no, they're not. And I showed them some patches they had done for another lodge, same size patch, same size Indians. They said, oh, well, okay, we can do it. Notice here, patches are going to be circles, right? Or rectangles or squares. We realized that if we did an unusual shape and carried it through everything in the set, we could emphasize the sets. This set is the ordeal. Now, right about here, there was a recession. So we decided to take the patch out of the registration fee to make the cost of just attending as low as possible. And then we'd sell the patches separately. You could prepay for one and you could buy them at the event. That had a side effect of, if you put a patch in with your registration fee, you're essentially selling it at cost. You don't make any profit off of the extras. But if all the patches are sold separately, then you make a profit from all the patches. Here, normal rectangle is 3x4. We made them 2 3/4 by 4 so they would fit side by side on a page in a collector's book. I worried that we would sell very many of a patch with nothing on a fire bonnet, but it sold very well. And we were very satisfied with the Swiss embroidery on the jacket patch, which by this time the youth are starting to call the year patch. Some of you claim to know Tico Perez. This is a set from when he was lodge chief. These are fish from Florida's Coral Reef State Park. Cape Canaveral, Cape Kennedy is in our council. The activity patches were devised by a vice chief from postage stamps. The year patch is from an 8x10 glossy of the very first launch, which was given to us by an adult who works on the shuttle. We sold this patch in our council office to make a little extra money. We were getting phone calls from California from people asking if they could get the patch. You heard of feathers on birds? How about birds on feathers? When the first one of these was being passed around the LAC, a chapter chief with an attitude held it up and said, "Where do you put the batteries?" This says North American Indian dwellings. The patch on the right is a pretty darn good looking patch with only 5 colors. The year patch is from a painting in the museum, in the Metropolitan Museum. The painting is like half the size of a wall. I was with a friend from Tipisa. We walked in the room. He saw the painting filling most of the opposite wall, and he blurted out, "I have that patch." These are animals not endangered, but protected by Florida law. The key deer on the left is a collie-sized deer. If you live on Big Pine Key and want to keep your flower bushes, you got to cover them surrounded with chicken wire or they become key deer food. The snails were collected in the 20s and 30s. They have all different colored patterns. Unscrupulous dealers would go in, take all the snails they wanted out of a particular hammock, and then set fire to the hammock so that nobody else could get some. The manatee is essentially a big gray footlocker. We had access to a photographer's slides that made them look pretty good. So we used one of those for our year patch. About 6 months after this year patch came out, that photographer's photography was featured in an issue of National Geographic. History of scouting. On the bottom, the Scout Handbook. As it happens, there's a twill that's exactly the same color as the cover of the first hardbound Scout Handbook. Of course, we went to the thread color chart to pick out some bright colors to zing up the patch. The embroidery on the patch to the left is pretty good, especially considering that it's Swiss embroidery, not computer stitch. This set is Florida environments, the 4 different environments they have in Florida. The top patch, the sky and the sea are embroidered in the same color blue, but stitched in different directions. If you were to hold that patch in your hand and tilt it back and forth, you can see the colors change back and forth. Our lodge chief's high school coach gave him a bunch of pencil drawings of eagles. So we took that and colored them up, made a nice looking set. The year patch on the right is a pretty good looking jacket patch with only half a dozen colors in it. On the left, the eagle's head, the manufacturer did a very good job with the stitching on the eagle's head. The set is Florida State things. That horse is a horse conch. The bird, well, the state bird is a mockingbird. So what do you do with a dumpy gray bird that sings real pretty? You go back to your thread color chart and look for colors to make it more exciting. Florida also has an official state rock, acantized coral, which in the whole world exists only in Tampa Bay. If you want to make it for your own lodge, you can have fun. Pennsylvania has an official state insect, the mosquito. California has an official state dirt. We got the idea of using the state seal when we realized that first Pinellas area and then West Central Florida Council had that on their council shoulder strip. So we wrote to the Secretary of State initially asking for clean artwork. It says color separations and a questionnaire to fill out. How many are we going to make? Where are we going to sell it? What are we going to charge for it? I think they want to be sure we weren't going to try and make some kind of bogus law enforcement patch. And by the time we filled out all the paperwork, we got a letter from the Secretary of State authorizing us to make the patch and distribute it in the way that we described. Next year, we had a lodge chief who worked at Disney, and he wanted his set to be Central Florida tourist attractions. Now, people were saying, "You put Disney on a patch, they're going to sue." No, it's settled in a California court case that you cannot copyright a building or a natural feature. However, we found a picture of some Daytona race cars in a book and used that. An adult in our lodge is into racing, and he showed that patch to a member of 43's race crew. Turns out you really can copyright the appearance of a race car. Well, our friend asked the guy on the race crew, well, what do we do now? And the guy on the crew said, get me one of the patches. What does a healthy Boy Scout look for every time he goes to the beach? That patch is derived from a postcard we bought in a grocery store. Lodge advisor says, all right, you can use it if you give her a little bit more bikini. That patch was very successful. We were going to order more until the mother of one of our chapter chiefs called the council office and complained to the council executive. We can only speculate what she wants her teenage son to be interested in, if not girls. We didn't make any more patches, and 2 or 3 of the ones we did make sold for $50. Our next chief liked the idea of Florida flowers. Now, why do we have 3 patches of the same flower? That's because this was when finally computer stitch was getting to be decent. So we wondered which people preferred, computer stitch or Swiss embroidery. We needed 600 patches. We made half one way and half the other way, and we took a poll. The poll was 50-50. People didn't care. So effective with this set, we made the switch to computer stitch. Look at that bottom patch. Keep that in mind in case anybody ever asks you, what color is a yellow hibiscus? Well, it's not all yellow. Archers. Our lodge chief was very big into ceremonies, and he wanted the arrow aimed high on all his patches. I said, well, if we do that, Robin Hood's going to miss the target. The Indian arrow is going to go right over the back of the bull. He says, I don't care. I want an archer aimed high on all the patches. Right about then, they came out with something new called felt. So we put felt on all the patches and put his arrow on that felt. All right, now I have to do a sidebar. There's 2 patches on here that we could not make these days. They show a Native American holding a weapon in a hostile manner. It seems that this came from National's interpretation of guidelines put out by the Indian American Committee. Okay, that's what we have to live by. Everybody knows they went to Etchconey, who has a very handsome patch flap, when the Indian's doing nothing except holding an atlatl over his head. They told Semulatchie they had to change their totem because their Indian was holding a weapon. And Semulatchie said, what do you mean? He's holding the bow and the arrow in the same hand, and he's crawling on his hands and knees. How is he holding a weapon in a hostile manner? Oh, well, I guess you're right. Okay, you don't have to change your totem. Next set is scenes from the legend. The one in the middle on the left is from a drawing by Catton, who was famous for his artwork of Plains Indians. Lodge advisor said, well, you can do that, but make sure there's a gap between the hilt of his knife and the rest of his anatomy. When this set is on display in our museum at camp, we invite youth to count the Indians in the year patch and then count again and see if they get the same number twice. Some of them can actually do it. Space. This is a case where the lodge chief wanted to draw his own patches, and he agreed with everybody. They actually improved from beginning to end. So he called them his kindergarten patch, his elementary school patch, his junior high school patch, and his high school patch. He did not do the year patch. We were encouraged to try a different supplier. I said, well, okay, but we need to have the patches in our hands a week before the event when we usually sell them. He said, no problem, I can do it. So a week before the event, he didn't put them in our hands. He put them in the hands of the express company, UPS, and they promptly shipped them to Seattle. You know how long it takes for something to go from Florida to Seattle? A week. You know how long it takes to get from Seattle back to Florida? A week. So here we have 200 very expensive patches on order, and our sales opportunity has vanished. A lodge advisor got a copy of the artwork and made an order form. When we passed that out, collected money. So in that way, we were able to sell out the 200 patches we didn't even have. This is from our most intellectual lodge chief. This is all artwork derived from a Belgian artist called Escher. And if you look, you'll see patches have morphing from one item to another. We're not sure if we traded on Escher's copyrights or not. He is deceased. The only patch he did color with is the bottom center one for service weekend. The others, we had to devise color of our own. And we also used Escher for our NOAC set. The middle patch didn't have a lot of colors, so the lettering, Tipisa Lodge, that's glow in the dark. Now, somebody had told me there's no difference between yellow and gold. Well, that kind of irritated me. From the top to bottom are 11 shades of yellow and gold. This set the boys came up with. You've heard of Escher's melting watches? Well, how about melting red teepees? I thought it was kind of cool, but I was cautious. I bought a bunch of extra postcards, so whenever I tried to trade the set at NOAC, I included a postcard. What does the Parthenon and the Sydney Opera House and Notre Dame have to do with scouting? The architecture merit badge, of course. The cathedral is embroidered all in shades of gray. The only black in that patch is the outline on the cathedral as a whole. Let me tell you, if you hold that patch in your hand, the cathedral almost looks three-dimensional. In case you don't recognize it, the bottom patch for service weekend is a TWA terminal at JFK, designed by this Eno Saarinen, the same man who designed the St. Louis Arch. You've heard of things on patches. How about if the thing is the patch? Right about this time, we added a weekend to our catalog. We started having a Native American weekend for the whole council. Scouts could come, Cubs could come, little brothers and sisters could come, everybody could come. We typically had 600 or 700 people at this event, except the last one, just a couple months ago, had over 1,000 people. So now we have 5 events on our calendar. And we'd seen fringe on patches from flaps from Canada and the Northwest, and it wasn't easy finding a patch to put fringe on our flap for us. But if you look close, you'll see the blanket pictured on the service weekend patch is also the blanket that the chief is wearing in the prow of his canoe. The next chief wanted his patch to feature scouting, which was easy to do, a little cut and paste. The year patch uses a photograph of Fran took when he was at Philmont. People said, oh, you put a Philmont on a patch, did you get permission? No, you cannot copyright buildings and natural features. So if you think that's the tooth of time, well, that's your opinion. Central Florida has a Magic Kingdom. Our basketball team is the Orlando Magic. So our NOAC set would be strong on magic. The top piece shows our red teepee morphing to a scout emblem. The flap shows a tessellation, which is a large figure made up of smaller versions of the same figure. The bottom figure has a wizard conjuring everything. If you see the pipes all glow in the dark. Right about then, the council rearranged its districts, which means the chapters get rearranged. The new chapter in East Orange County included a Tosahatchee Wildlife Preserve, so they took that for the name of their chapter. 2 or 3 or 4 years later, they learned that Tosahatchee really does mean crazy chicken, so they instantly adopted the crazy chicken as their chapter symbol. And when the lodge did its set for NOAC, Tosahatchee decided to make its own patch to add to the lodge set, featuring the crazy chicken. This year we hosted a section event, which meant we needed patches for 6 functions. Great, we have enough functions to spell out our lodge name in patches. Coosa and Birmingham has done it. Equatawadi has done it, except they needed 12 patches. And these are all fans of Seminole patchwork. Even the one in the top center that says HOST, that patchwork that's just vertical bars, is an old Seminole pattern called rain. Now, many lodges have chief's bonnets. A few Florida lodges have Seminole chief's jackets. This jacket, you'll notice, has 5 bands of Seminole patchwork. The tribal chairman wears a jacket with 5 bands. They wear 5 bands to the green corn dance. A jacket with 5 bands is like a tuxedo Seminole jackets. And our Chiefs jacket has 5 bands. Trouble is, it's humongous. So we like having it. This set celebrates an anniversary of camp. On the left, you'll see a little blobs by that tower. Patch Company didn't want to put the human figures in and said, you can't tell they're people. I insisted, yeah. Put the people there to give us a sense of size for the tower as a whole. The lower right is Sulphur Springs. It's a shallow little spring in a corner of camp. And no matter how bad a drought we've had, that spring has never completely stopped running. When camp was new, any place you turn on a spigot in camp, you got sulfur water, which if you could tolerate by the time you drank it for 2 or 3 days, the mosquitoes stopped bothering you. The gate on the top was designed by an architect. And he liked the patch so much, he framed it and hung it on his office wall. We had a chief who wanted to do a renaissance of the lodge. Okay. First time we submitted creation of Adam, all he was wearing was an artfully draped sash. National said, nope, he needs clothes. And God is surrounded by putti, which is Italian for a little infant. And we had to remove a putti that was showing a little bit too much putti. On the left is a Vesuvian man. And of course, we neutered him. So he was no more revealing than someone in a wetsuit. National said, no, you can't do that. You have to cover his shoulders. Indecent shoulders, please. We put him in scout shorts and they were fine with that. The Indian for our Native American weekend is from an engraving from the late 15th century. Now, look at the patch on the right. That's Socrates and Plato from a painting of Raphael in the Vatican. I invite you to admire the embroidery on the drapery in their robes. The year patch, that's just about the most fantastic embroidery I've ever seen. The way a patch is made with computer stitch, first of all, somebody has to make a pattern. We like this so much, we asked the patch company if we could give a bonus to artists who rendered this. Of course, the original painting has a lady in her natural state, so we got a scout to pose for us in her same pose and substituted him. Noack again. In this year, they're retiring the space shuttles. The top patch features the contrail of the shuttle as seen from every place in the council if the sky was clear, whether you're in the north or in the south. A friend who lives in St. Pete tells me the sky's really clear. You can even see a shuttle take off from across the whole state. The surfer really is a Cocoa Beach surfer. Just north of Daytona Beach is the shark capital of North America. So that's what we put on the bottom. Now we took 100 of those patches and added sound to them. If you squoze one of those special patches in the right place, you hear surf, then screams, and then yum. Tosahatchee contributed their own crazy chicken patch. The next chief was a student at University of Central Florida, and he was a very big UCF fan, so he wanted his patch set to feature sports played at UCF. If you look, the night is the one they used to have at football games. If you look at the logo on the upper left, that is not the university logo. Of course, we couldn't use that. So we went online and found a genetic night logo just to put on the patch. Next, you've heard of the Audubon birds. These are Audubon birds of Florida. And see how the birds explode out of the typical round shape, just to make it a little bit more exciting. This set exists just for colorful, and it is called the Kaleidoscope set. This set is Fish of Florida, and it shows you how flexible we are, and exactly what shade of red you can have, and still fit within our lodge symbol of a red teepee. How about prehistoric animals of Florida? Notice how we're getting so much from our patch companies. Look at the lower F patch with the detail. We have never told our patch company, we don't honestly want to spend too much money. We've told our patch company, use as many colors as you think you need to. Well, a computer stitch patch comes with 9 colors to start with, and they would typically go up to 14 or 15 colors. No problem. Also notice that every patch has a loop. I forgot to mention this earlier. All our pocket patches always come with a loop, not only for the convenience of being able to wear them right away, but it's so that we don't want a scout to ever take off of his uniform, something he did with his troop, and replace it with an OA patch. So that's symbolic of the fact that the OA is never meant to take the place of your troop activity. And here's the year patch to go with prehistoric animals. Notice that I can still barely fit into an 8.5 by 11-inch page for your collection. Well, if our lodge totem is a teepee, how about if we use teepees? It was actually kind of fun looking around to find different atmospheres, different ecologies we could put a teepee in. And this patch we got from a picture in a book, except it didn't have enough teepees in it because our lodge chief said, I want to have as many teepees in the patch as we had chapters. And we had 11 chapters in, so we had to put a couple more teepees in at the far end. Tipisa has done sets for 50 years, and now most of the other Florida lodges do the same thing. This set is from the new lodge in Tampa Bay, Atuyahati. Their chapter totem, their lodge totem, is the University of South Florida bull. Tamalachi is in Swanee River Area Council in Tallahassee. The council is so small, they only have a single week of summer camp. And yet, yes, they have imagination. I have to admit, I would be disappointed if in the course of this presentation, you didn't have occasion to at least once say, wow. Thank you.
Yes, which patch company do you use?
For a long time, our Swiss embroidery was Midwest Swiss, but their pattern maker retired. Now we're using Sunshine Emblem. There's someplace near Lauderdale. What they're good for, if you go on the internet and find them, they have thread color charts online. Now, keep in mind the color chart is no more accurate than your monitor is, but it sure gives you an idea what range of colors they have. They will sell you a thread color chart for $50 because that's what they cost them. And they even have color charts for the background twill. I have a special color chart with colors of threads that change color when they're exposed to sunlight. However, for an experiment, they took a patch that had that effect and put it on a windowsill, and that died out after about 6 months. They also have a color chart with glow-in-the-dark colors, and that stuff lasts forever. In our museum, we have some patches from a chapter that we've done year after year after year, and when you turn out the lights, they still glow. Now, the older ones don't glow as much as the newer ones, but that glow-in-the-dark is still happening after 6 or 7 years.
What's your average cost for your event patch? Just curious. Approximate.
Well, a short story goes with that. Remember I told you we switched from Swiss to computer stitch?
Right.
At that time, computer stitch was cheaper and we could have dropped the patches. But they said, no, the Swiss embroider patches, we're selling them for $4. Let's hold the price at $4. So the price for our event patch stayed at $4 for 20 years.
Wow.
They only recently went up to $5.
From a value standpoint, what are the keys in that group?
The year patches typically sell for $50 a piece. The other patches go up and down. Our weekend with the fewest attendance is a service weekend. So that's the event for which we made the fewest patches. And so typically for resale, they cost a little bit more. But the Babe, of course, is going to be the hardest one to get. And some of the others have gotten to be more obscure as the years have passed. Typically for spring conclave and fall fellowship, we'd get 400 patches. For ordeals, we get 600 patches. And for service weekend, we get 200 patches. And for national conference, we get 600 because we always sold them to our lodge. We figured a NOAC patch represents a contingent. What does a contingent represent? It represents the whole lodge. So any patch that represents a contingent represents the whole lodge. So we always sold our NOAC patches to everybody. Now, they did come out tight sometimes. story I like is we're running tight on patches. So we said, okay, we have a few extra, not a lot. Buy one, go to the end of the line. Buy one, go to the end of the line. And then they sold out. When that happened, a couple of adults came to me and said, well, that guy over there has 4 or 5 patches, and we weren't able to get a single extra one. How come he has extras and he doesn't? I said, well, he probably stood in line 4 times. How many times did you stand in line? Well, we never stood in line. It was always too long.
I'd like to say a few things. I noticed the last few patches, one was influenced by Dali, the one with the melting objects, and you even had Pablo Picasso in there with the face of something was one of his faces. I want to bring up something that about copyrights that I was involved with, and copyrights are a strange thing, but the 2 examples I want to give you may help you understand certain things. Take the famous portrait of Baden-Powell, the 1929 painting of Baden-Powell. Well, I once faced the English supply division, the British Scout division, and said, well, you can't use Baden-Powell, he's copyrighted. Well, what's copyrighted is an exact color copy of the painting or a black and white photographic copy of the painting. But if you redraw it, that's not copyrighted. You can redraw Baden-Powell any which way you want. What's copyrighted is a picture of the painting in color and black and white. Another little example that may help you is I was designing a lot of stuff for the 100th anniversary of Scouting, where they used this dove flying sideways. Well, the British told me that the guy from the World Bureau who designed it said, oh, you can't use that. We don't want you to use, they said 2 things to me in one breath. Oh, you can't use that. That's copyrighted. Oh, by the way, you drew it differently. Yes, I drew it differently so it wouldn't be copyrighted. I didn't answer them. I didn't say that. I didn't answer them. I just listened to them. I went ahead that year and designed over 100 postage stamps, which I used Baden-Powell and I used that dove. And there was nothing happening because it's not really copyrighted. I redrew that bird.